Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server-related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features, or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Compañeros, welcome to episode 94. This is going to be one of those episodes where we're kind of reaching outside SQL Server just a little bit. Michael Armentrout.
Yes, and Michael works with Summit Healthcare, and he's a DBA focused on QlikView. And today's topic is going to be Qlik, spelled Q-L-I-K.
Yeah, that's one of those words you see it, particularly with the L, and I'm thinking there's got to be a U, like quack.
Yeah, and I know I trip up every time I try and say it, at least until someone told me it's just Qlik.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So thanks, Michael, for ironing that out for us. So ultimately, again, we're going to be talking a little bit about that, how it kind of plays into the other environments, how he's been using it in the healthcare space. We thought it would be interesting to talk about that, and some of you may be using Qlik, and so we'd be interested in getting your thoughts there as well. We do have a couple of shout outs for today's episode.
Yes, the first one is from Chuck Lathrop, and he would like to talk on the podcast about SQL Server replication. And I know that's one of those topics that a lot of people shy away from because they don't like replication, but it's been there for a long time, and it looks like it's there to stay. So not one of those that's been deprecated by any means.
Sure.
And a lot of people are using it. I first met Chuck at a SQL Saturday in, when was it, 2011? No, 2012, and where he was presenting on replication. And since then, I know he's done quite a few presentations on it and has become quite an expert on SQL Server replication. And I know he's the guy I go to when I have questions beyond my skills there. So we look forward to having him on a future episode.
Yes, that's right. We might as well go ahead and throw that out. If you do have a question about replication or a scenario that you'd like us to consider in our conversation with Chuck, let us know. You can leave a comment on the website or hit me up by email. Let us know. You can leave a comment on the website or hit me up by email, carlos.chacon@sqldatapartners.com. We also want to give a shout out to Kevin Hill for mentioning the Compañero Conference. So Kevin and I have been chatting back and forth, and so Kevin actually put out a post on his blog about the conference and encouraging kind of those lone DBAs to give it a look, which we appreciate.
And I know getting the conference put together is exciting. I mean, we're making huge strides every week. And right now, we've really been focused a lot on figuring out the right speakers, people who will fit into that accidental lone or new DBA that will have content that fits into those areas.
Exactly.
And I know we're looking, I guess our selection process is a little bit different than I've seen at other conferences in the past.
That's right. So ultimately, we're trying to reach out to a few folks. The first initial speakers, obviously, were people that we thought would accept our invitation and the duration of the conference. So it won't be a scenario where, somebody kind of gets there at lunch, gives their session, and then leaves, right? We're asking them to stay for the 2 days. They're going to be attending the other sessions. And again, the reason or the idea behind that is to help keep the conversation going. So that way you strike up a conversation with that speaker later. You were both exposed to the same things. They know the question or the scenario that was brought up, and then they can speak to that, right? Without having to go through and explain it all. It also is going to help with access, right? So again, that idea of, the long lines going up to the speaker, trying to get your question in, you're not going to have that pressure. You're going to have multiple opportunities to chat with the speaker.
Right. Yep. And I think that, and that's very different than what I've seen at conferences in the past, because oftentimes you'll see a speaker just in a session and you may never see him again.
Exactly.
And I think I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a really good what I've seen at conferences in the past, because oftentimes you'll see a speaker just in a session and you may never see him again.
Exactly.
And I think I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a really great way of doing it.
Yes, I am excited to get as well. That's going to be October 4th and 5th down in Norfolk, Virginia. I will say, and let me go ahead and throw this out, that we are looking for a few more female speakers. And so if you know someone that kind of fits that bill, let us know. We'd be happy to chat with them. And again, we mentioned a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. We'd like to have 100 speakers, right? That would be great.
Yes.
But we need to make sure that we have enough attendees, right? To make it just logistics and everything work. And so that's part of the balancing act that we're playing, particularly with year one, as we're trying to experimenting with some of these things. But we think that we're going to have a great conference, even if we had to have it with just the speakers that have been announced to this point. But we are hoping to add to that, and of course, we're hoping to get our attendee count up a bit.
Right.
And you, compañeros, have an opportunity to help with that if you'll help us spread the word, particularly if the idea of the lone DBA conference or the accidental DBA conference is not necessarily your cup of tea, but you know somebody who might fit that bill. Please pass it along. We would appreciate it. And I know they'll appreciate it and have a good time, and they'll thank you for it afterwards. Okay, let's do a little SQL Server in the news. You've been cooking up a little something with Database Health Monitor, Steve.
Yes. So SQL Server 2017 CTP2, or Community Technology Preview 2, came out in the last week. And I've downloaded that and testing it out. And as I do with every new version of SQL Server, I'm testing Database Health Monitor against it and seeing what's changed and what needs to be adapted or what needs to be updated for that to work. So when 2017 as the final product, that way I'll know that Database Health Monitor is up to date and will work great with it.
And ready to go.
Yep.
Yes, and so it will be interesting to see that adoption. But I think it's also reassuring to know that those who are using Database Health Monitor, should they want to spin up a couple of Linux servers, they'll have a monitoring tool to be able to help them out as well.
Yes, indeed.
So I'm not sure that this necessarily qualifies as new, but it was new to me, and so I thought I would share. Microsoft has come up with a total cost of ownership calculator for Azure infrastructure. Now, emphasis on infrastructure. So this is kind of the infrastructure as a service, not necessarily the platform as a service, right? So Azure SQL Database is not included in that. VMs running SQL Server are kind of the focus of this website. And so they have actually invited the folks from Nucleus Research to come out and come up with some of these numbers to help validate numbers, to help validate, again, that total cost or the idea of the total cost of a server. So everything from electricity to switches and routers to the cost of the VM licenses that you're paying for all of that infrastructure.
Yep. And what's interesting about that is that oftentimes when people look at the cost, they purely look at the cost of the software licensing. And
yeah, exactly.
What this does is it sort of has an all-inclusive cost. So you know really what it's costing you and how to compare that over time.
Yeah, and so if you're not aware, there are two prices in Azure. Again, talking about the VMs. One, and the default price assumes that you are buying a software license. If you have software assurance, you can go in there and tweak that and bring your own licenses to Azure. And that will actually dramatically reduce the cost of that VM.
Right.
Because one of the features of Azure, one of the benefits is that I can go up and down as much and as quickly and as little as I'd like. Right. So I have a kind of a flexible infrastructure. But if you know that you're going to have a VM that's going to be up 24/7, 7 days a week for a year, Microsoft will actually analyze that a little bit and can give you a lower cost because they know that that is going to stick around, right? You're not just going to use it for a month or two and then throw it away. So that's another consideration that you can take. And the calculator has all of those components. The one thing it doesn't have is the ability to save. So you can actually go in and they throw out some numbers as far as like what licenses would cost or routers, electricity, things like that. So it might be different in your area, right? But if you go in and start tweaking all that stuff, there's no way to save. So, but you can export it, that information to Excel.
Or you could always do a print screen and just paste it off to Word if you wanted to as well.
Or that. Yeah.
The guaranteed save.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so the show notes for today's episode are going to be at SQLDataPartners.com/Qlik. That is QLIK.
Or at SQLDataPartners.com/episode number. And today's episode is 94.
Yes. So let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with Michael. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yes. Thanks for coming on the show today. And we're hoping that you can give us some insight into this new technology that I've been seeing a lot about and that I'm actually curious about its name. So, Steve and I were kind of talking about this and we were like, Qlik, Qlik, Clock.
Right.
So tell us how you pronounce it.
It's pronounced Qlik.
Qlik.
Wow.
Qlik with a Q.
Qlik with a Q. There you go.
That's so easy to say that way compared to what we're trying to do.
I've seen it spelled many ways. So,
well, so ultimately, the interest, and I think one of the reasons we wanted to have you on, we've been talking a little bit about reporting options, and we'd like to, try to get around the edges, if you will, of the SQL Server community from time to time, just to talk about what others are seeing and what they might be experiencing. So last year, as Microsoft eclipsed Oracle on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, you could see where other technologies were in relation to that. And so they continue to publish this out. And one that I saw that was moving up the ranks was this Qlik technology. And of course, then talking with some folks, you being among them, that are listeners of the show, and then also users of this product, I thought, oh, okay, well, we should probably have the conversation because if people are being exposed to it, it'd be nice to at least talk about the Qlik or QlikView. Give us the nickel tour there.
Okay. So Qlik, the company, was founded in 1993 in Sweden. And the creators wanted to create software that mimics the way humans intuitively think, which is through associations.
Okay.
So in 1996, they released the first version of QlikView.
And this is a reporting software, or?
It's a cradle to grave. So it's ETL along with storage or EDW, and then producing UI, UX on the back end. So you don't need an SSIS, although you could leverage that, but it's self-contained.
Interesting. So it would connect directly to your SQL Server box and then just kind of take care of the rest?
Correct. There's a way to load data, and it's pretty much a load column names from SQL and then a select statement at its base. Correct. There's a way to load data, and it's pretty much a load column names from SQL and then a select statement at its basic level.
So tell us how you got started with it. I mean, because you were using some SQL Server tools, if you will. We talked a little bit about SSRS and whatnot. You mentioned SSIS. So how does an organization, or maybe take us through a little bit of that history, how did you decide, or what was the thought process? Like, hey, we should be using Qlik.
Originally, the company I'm at wanted to go the Microsoft BI stack route. And then we're a very rural area, so they learned pretty quickly that we're not going to be able to staff up to leverage Microsoft. So we went with another vendor who had a product that worked with Meditech, our EMR, and we developed in that for about a year and a half, and it just didn't pan out. It wasn't robust enough. So they went back to the drawing board and brought QlikView back in, or brought them in, excuse me. They were considered originally, but...
Yeah, it did make the cut, and now they're getting a second look.
Correct.
So then what type of things are you doing with QlikView, or were you doing with QlikView in that environment?
A ton of clinical reporting, but I guess now might be a good time to sort of pull back the covers and maybe explain why the Qlik technologies, what their advantage is.
Sure.
Yeah.
So they have an associative engine. So as it pulls data in, it compresses it with cardinality. So, for example, there are 40 some odd thousand zip codes, 43,000 zip codes, I believe, in the US. And so if you have 5 million customers, you don't store 5 million zip codes, you store 43,000. If you have male, female, you use zip codes, I believe, in the US. And so if you have 5 million customers, you don't store 5 million zip codes, you store 43,000. If you have male, female, you store 2 values for that.
Okay.
So just as an example, we have an app that pulls in the last 30 days of nursing orders. So in SQL Server, that's 557 megabytes. But when we pull that into QlikView, it's 27 megabytes. That same information.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. So there's some compression going on.
Yeah, massive compression. And then both Qlik products, QlikView and QlikSense, and we can get into the differences later, are all in memory.
Gotcha.
Okay.
We've seen some of that, play out here as of late with some features in the SQL Server realm. So it is interesting, right? So, QlikView was maybe been one of those kind of pushing Microsoft in that direction, almost sounds like.
Correct. And I think a lot of others are starting to.
With that, once you've got all that data in memory, and then earlier you mentioned building UI and UX, are you then using that to build just the reporting UI and UX, or are you actually building applications that can change or manipulate the data?
Good question. The Qlik products are sort of read-only. So you pull from your source, and then ultimately the thing that makes everything else easier is your data model. So what you shoot for is a star schema. So once you bring that data in through your ETL and you manipulate it, and you can do it on the front end or on the ETL loads, and there's various places to do that, then you bring it into a star schema. And so Qlik's model is everything is associated. Each data piece is associated, sort of air quotes, with every other piece of data. So your tables, you have one column that they join on, your primary key, and it can only be one column. That they join on, your primary key, and it can only be one column. So then through the visual, you will be able to see associations. So Qlik is known for their green, white, gray color scheme. So if you select a value just say in the UI and it's green, that's the selected value. So you might choose all males. And so you'll have on your other screens, you'll have values that are white, which means they're associated, and you'll have values that are gray, which means they're not associated. So it's an associative data model. So
just to take that example a little bit further, just to make sure that I'm understanding. So again, we're talking about a medical facility here, right? So I'm kind of querying the data and I'm looking for patterns basically, right? So I want to know, so the males that have broken legs, just as whatever, as an example, right? What the males that have broken legs, just as whatever, as an example, right? What other things might those people experience? And then it's going to show that to me without having to build the report or build all the logic to show that data?
Correct. Absolutely correct. So I just want to preface, I love SQL Server. So what I'm about to say is not necessarily a knock on it. It's just it's a comparison.
Right.
So,
No.
Yeah. So, query-based tools like, for example, cubes, you have to pre-build everything. You have to know what questions the user is going to ask, and you have to build those answers into it. Sure. They change something, you have to rebuild the cube. They have to wait a day, 2 days, whatever it might be. So with query-based tools, you have predefined joins, pre-aggregated hierarchies, and it's only part of the story. If you forget to add a column into your query or into your result set or your cube or whatnot, you've lost it until someone recognizes that and you go back.
Right. No, I think you bring up it's just changing, and you have these, other database technologies that are coming up to help solve some of those exact problems, right? Yes. Because of the team of people that generally, that you have to have data warehousing experience to, to put all that together. So to have tools that make it easier, like I don't need to be a data warehouse expert to get in there and start playing around with my data is very attractive.
Yes. And that's sort of the selling point. And then whenever we can get into the differences between QlikView and QlikSense, where audience each of those serves.
Sure. Yeah. So let's go ahead and do that now.
Okay. Sure. So QlikView is what they term guided analytics. So you sort of build the UI, and that could be scatter plots, bar charts, pie charts, pivot tables. There's lots of objects within QlikView that you can build, but you sort of guide the user. You kind of nudge them along. And then depending on what you expose, sort of guide the user. You kind of nudge them along. And then depending on what you expose, they could go, oh, well, I didn't know that, males with broken arms, they all get some certain medicine, or most of them get a certain medicine.
Sure.
So unless you're asking that question beforehand, you won't know that in SQL.
Right. Gotcha.
So Qlik exposes those, or QlikView exposes those through the UI.
And then QlikSense?
QlikSense is it's their newest product. They're morphing towards the web-based cloud. And it's what's called self-service analytics.
There's another buzz term.
Yes. In QlikSense, the syntax is, if you could take QlikView syntax and drop it into a QlikSense application, and it would work the same. You have a different sort of layout and constraints in your UI, but ultimately what people would build with items. And this is when data governance comes into. If your organization decides this is the definition of length of stay from point X to point B, or A to B, then you might build that, and then users on the back end could theoretically drop that and onto a chart that they want as a measure or as a dimension or whatever however they want to use it. And then it's ultimately ends up being self-service.
Gotcha. You've thrown out, terms, dimensions and, columns and joins and, kind of setting some of this stuff. I guess take us through some of that. And while it's been a while since you've used SSRS, you mentioned in our, as we were getting ready to go live here, I guess what some of the hurdles potentially, or maybe some of the differences that you've seen? What's the ramp up, I guess is more my question, to start using a tool like this?
The ramp up is the biggest thing is an understanding of the data.
Okay.
Obviously.
So that doesn't go away.
No, not at all. Not at all. You have to understand the data. And then for DBAs or SQL people, what was real hard for me was because it's load columns from SQL statement, and I wanted to write these big elaborate SQL statements. And they kept telling me,
gotcha.
Just suck the data in, just suck it all in and work with it in QlikView. It's much easier. And I've learned they were absolutely correct. It's much easier. So just, bring in all the tables you need, and then you have to model it. You might have to do some cleanup, but ultimately, I think in comparison, everything's in one environment. You don't have to go to multiple environments or use sort of multiple tools. Like you may have an SSIS package that writes to some table in your data warehouse that SSRS pulls from. You could theoretically do it all in one product. I guess are using this is sort of a replacement for data warehouse. You could use Qlik as a replacement for data warehouse.
Right.
So
again, that self-service model, right? You just suck the data in, let the tool kind of figure it out and do some of those hard things for you.
So then with that, if there's a listener out there who's a DBA or a BI developer, or someone who wants to try it out for the first time, is there a developer or a trial edition or something like that they could try out as a proof of concept?
Yes, everyone can go to Qlik.com and can download QlikView or QlikSense, and it's a fully functional, no limitations, product. What you can't do is I can't create an application and send it to you, Steve or Carlos, and you guys open it up on yours and have it be working. So that's the limitation. But on your desktop, it's fully functional.
Okay, interesting. So then let's just explore that comment you made about feature and send it. So if you build an application in the paid version, I guess at this point, or the full featured version, you create an application of something you want to share with Carlos and I, for instance, and would that application then contain a copy of all the data at the point you built it and you'd ship it off to us? Or would it be something where we'd have to be on the same network with access to the SQL server and just be querying the data as it's needed?
Good question. So we get back into both products. So I'm not aware of if I create a QlikView application, I can share with my organization because I put it on the publisher server, and then we have security, and it can be shared through it can be accessed through 80 groups, whatever your permissions are. I'm not aware of being able to share that with you. There might be some external facing option, but I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, gotcha. You'd think there'd still have to be some kind of shared repository, right? Because even though the data is quote unquote in memory.
Internal.
That up.
So when you talk about sharing, then it's really internal sharing inside of your organization.
With QlikView, it's internal.
Okay.
So with QlikSense, they have cloud, and then they have a business model, which is more for the enterprise side. So if I created an app in QlikSense, I could upload it to my QlikSense cloud, and I could invite you and Carlos to view it or to utilize it. And you could, if you had QlikSense on your desktops or had an account on QlikSense Cloud, you could leverage it.
Okay. So then do you see Power BI being a direct competitor of this, or do they really do different things?
They're a competitor. They end up at a similar point, just in a different way. And I'm not super versed in Power BI. That's one of those things on my list that I, sort of like Tableau, which is the other competitor. Like, man, I need to sort of like Tableau, which is the other competitor. Like, man, I need to spend some time and just sort of understand the differences. So I'm not super versed in the Power BI.
Well, I think that answers your question, right? If Tableau is a competitor, then Power BI is definitely in the mix.
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
Because I think there's definitely been comparisons from Tableau to Power BI. I think probably that strength, the association strength, and again, this is also coming from somebody who's not a Power BI guru, but while it will definitely suck in that data and you can play with it, we've talked with some of the folks even about doing like mobile reporting. You definitely want to limit some of that data. It sounds like QlikView is a little bit more robust in that sense. But what tool do people want to get comfortable with and that's going to suit their needs?
Right. It ultimately boils down to a culture, is what I found. If you have dare I say, a younger culture, right. It ultimately boils down to a culture, is what I found. If you have dare I say, a younger culture that is open to different delivery methods, then it's more accepted. I think when you have an older culture, they go, "Wow, that's really cool. Can you make that? Can you email me that every morning?"
Yeah.
Yes, we can, but that's not the point of it. The point is for you to go in and discover on your own, to click around, no pun intended, but click around and make the associations and discover things.
Gotcha. So now that's an interesting, a little tidbit you brought up. So you can schedule reports and kind of send snapshots, if you will, of, hey, here's your data.
Yes. They have a product called Imprinting, and they purchased it probably about a year ago and have incorporated it. So that's where you schedule. Gotcha. So you might have an entire application. It may.
Okay. So on your comparison to Tableau that you mentioned earlier, I know one of the things I've seen with Tableau is it's often driven from sort of the business side of an organization rather than the IT side of the organization. And do you see the same thing happening with Qlik, where it would be somebody purchases it to analyze their data and then it sort of ends up in IT's lap later?
In my N=1 experience, we say, hey, we have this tool that can do all these great things. Here are all the bells and whistles. And they go, yes, we want that. And we want to do an application around, say, sepsis. So then it comes back to IT. So in the QlikView model, it ultimately comes back, I guess, to IT for your developers to create the solution, whereas they're moving towards the QlikSense model, which is self-service. So still IT's involved, and we're creating the master items that there might be. So still IT's involved, and we're creating the master items that there might be 50, could be 200, but users can then go in and drag and drop to the various bar charts or pie charts, scatter plots, whatever it might be, and that we have predefined, agreed upon, governed measures. So it's an iterative process, and it takes time to build up a library like that, but that's the ultimate goal.
Give us a quick overview of the architecture. We've talked about it a little bit, right? Just from a components perspective, do I have a QlikView server and then I just connect to my SQL server and then it does the rest of it? Like, so the matching of the data and the UI components, or give us an overview of that architecture.
Okay. So what I would do on my local PC, I would connect to my data sources and I would bring the data in locally. I would develop a full application, so the UI, and I would do the modeling and the ETL and the cleanup, the UI, everything. And then what I would do is I would then port that application to the publishing server, and that exposes it out on our internal network. And then those folks that have the correct AD credentials can see it. So that's sort of the security model, one of the security models with it. And since QlikSense, we have not purchased on enterprise level, but I imagine it's a similar concept. One of the things is QlikView. If I expose a QlikView application, the end users can only consume it. There's nothing else they can do. Now in QlikSense, there is the ability to basically download my application, and they could create their own tabs or dashboards or whatnot. So it's sort of two products, the old school and the new school, and they're sort of morphing towards each other.
Right. Last question here. From a job perspective or a demand perspective, as we record this, you're transitioning. But when it comes out, you'll be at your new location. You've put in, a couple of years into learning this. You mentioned that you're in a small Midwestern town. I mean, are there opportunities? Are you seeing when you decided, and I'm not sure how you decided to make the transition here, but are you seeing opportunities? Do you think this is still kind of a growth area?
It's still a growth area, but there are a lot of opportunities. And I only say that based on the emails I receive. And, it's a lot of what I receive is a lot of contract opportunities.
Oh, sure, of course.
And then there are,
that's just the nature of the beast.
Right, exactly. That's what people reach out with. So there is, based on my emails, there's, demand for predominantly QlikSense, because that's kind of what folks are pushing nowadays, because that's a new product. And one of the differences I meant to mention earlier was QlikView, you build it and you design it for a resolution, and it can be consumed on a mobile device. But QlikSense is all HTML5, and so I build an app, and it renders in sizes, whether I'm on my laptop, I'm on an iPhone, I'm on an iPad, it doesn't matter. It just,
gotcha.
It's all that.
Yeah, it's responsive.
Yes. And so what Qlik has done is they built a base product, which they keep improving upon, but they expose their APIs. And so now there's a market growing for folks creating extensions. So if there's a certain kind of chart that maybe QlikSense doesn't come with out of the box.
Gotcha.
There's a big market, a boutique market, if you will, springing up, creating different extensions.
Interesting. Now, we should note, and again, but obviously you're moving to a new place, so we can't speak to that necessarily just yet.
Right.
But at least in your current experience and some of the discussions you've had, very similar to the SQL side, while you can have some reporting experience, there is still some administration components associated with it. Or I guess I should say, in essence, the database administration and the reporting are still kind of under the same umbrella or responsibility. Is that fair?
In my case, yes, because we're a small shop, so wear multiple hats, but I can't say if that's the norm. I'd say there are larger shops that obviously might have a more definitive separation of duties.
Right.
We're like, okay, QlikView developers, here's your read-only login into SQL Server, DB data reader,
have at it.
Suck all the data you want out into your apps, because you're going to store those QBDs, the data files compressed on your server, not mine.
Gotcha.
So from the perspective of the DBA who's responsible for that server that all the data is being pulled from, are there any gotchas or anything that they should really be aware of as they're allowing access to that data to be used through Qlik?
Yes, and we learned this the hard way.
Oh.
So being both the DBA and the QlikView developer, we had a lot of projects. We were doing agile methodology and the whole nine, so we were relatively quickly cranking out applications. So everyone, or the two of us in a vacuum, created our own queries back to the database. So what DBAs should be aware of is the same queries coming back. So both of us might be pulling the last 30 days of orders, which is bad in the sense of, rather than doing a full sort of data warehouse model where every night there's a separate job that pulls in the changes in the last 24 hours. And we're hitting that to pull our information. So that's one thing I would sort of caution, or with DBAs, is to get that sort of governance down. Make sure it's only pulling once. Once a night. Once a night.
right?
So then,
rather than 29 times
yes.
the same data.
So does that mean then that the different developers just have to sort out the data that's being pulled in and be using the same data that's there rather than writing their own queries to get it? Or is it more complex for the Qlik developer than that?
It really depends. So there's nothing stopping each developer from pulling their own set of data. In a perfect world, you would have a governed set of data. So for example, you might all agree that, okay, here are the 30 fields that constitute patient data, a patient. And so every night, we're going to go out and pull the changes into this one QBD, which is our QlikView data file. And then, hey, developers, you're going to write your applications against this QBD. So you're not going to hit the server, the SQL server, 3 or 4 times, 20 times. You're all going to pull from this agreed upon governed set of data.
Okay. It
can go either way. Like currently, we're all just pulling what we need when we need it. And it can create contention at times.
Sure.
Yep. All right. Well, good stuff there.
Very cool. So I guess last words on Qlik?
Let's see. I would say, just like to give an example, sort of that DBAs might be able to relate to. You can create an app that goes out and pulls backup file and backup set. And let's say you want to look at the average size of the backups or whatnot. Well, back to our modeling, when you bring those 2 tables in, they have about 6 or 7 columns in common. So as a QlikView developer, what I would do is I would go in and I would rename the columns in one table so that there's only one column that they have in common. That's sort of the key to this all. So like your backup set axes. So for example, I might have a bar chart that looks at, okay, what's the average backup size for every database on this server? And it creates a bar chart.
Okay.
Now I can create what are called list boxes, which is just a unique list of values. So for example, database. Okay, it gives me all the unique database names. And then in our case, there might be different compatibility modes. So I'll have a list box for compatibility modes. And so through the GUI or through the application, I might say, okay, it lists all the databases descending and, this is the average size. But how many are at 100 compatibility level? So once I click 100, I can visually see, and this is probably better if I shared a screenshot, but I can visually see, 2 of my databases on this server, or 3 of them, are at compatibility level 100. So the other ones, which are gray, which means they're not associated, well, they're not at that level. So even databases on this server, or 3 of them, are at compatibility level 100. So the other ones, which are gray, which means they're not associated, well, they're not at that level. So even I may not have known that, I've got different compatibility levels. But through a tool like this that's visual because everything's associated, again, green, associated white, and then gray is not associated. I can visually see that, and that might lead me down another path to ask more questions. And that's just one example that I tried to, create in the SQL space that DBAs might be familiar with versus an esoteric one.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, and it's something I'm familiar with, and it makes total sense at that point. But do you find that DBAs actually end up using Qlik to do that type of work, or is that just more of a theoretical type example?
It's probably more theoretical. Again, n equals 1, unfortunately, is my sample pool. So I use it for things like that, just to kind of, okay, I'm going to quickly throw together these, 2, 3, 4, 5 tables, and I'm going to look for something. And then 9 times out of 10, when I'm looking for something, I discover something else. In the example I gave you, another list box could be what type of backup was it? Was it data or log? And I may click a database to see what its average backup size is, and the L may turn gray. And that tells me there's been no log backups on this. Now, there are other methods to figure that out, but just as an example, you can leverage it visually, go, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Then you take some action.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah, what I think is cool about that is, again, we all have our preferred ways, to go about that. But if you have that skill and the tool is there, it'd be very easy to go around and just start like, hey, what else? Like, let me start asking some of these questions that maybe I wouldn't be asking because I have to go figure out what a column name is. Or maybe figure that out afterwards once I start seeing some correlations or whatever?
Right. So there's definitely a learning curve. You got to learn the syntax, which is it's not difficult, but there's a little bit of a learning curve. But once you get comfortable with that, you can just bring data in. So, for example, I created Meditech is a MUMPS, old school 60s, 70s programming application, but they port all of the data every night to a SQL Server, which is the Meditech data repository. So a lot of the times the analysts who know Meditech inside and out don't know SQL Server. Now I know SQL Server, but I don't know Meditech inside and out. So there are tables within Meditech that map columns to tables within Meditech and give you hints about where it came from. So I built an application off of two tables that brings in and maps them. So if I want to search for a module, like I want to see all the lab modules, well, application off of two tables that brings in and maps them. So if I want to search for a module, like I want to see all the lab modules, well, in my application, I just click lab and it shows me all the lab tables. And then if someone says it has to do with admissions or admitting time, okay, well, I can search admit and it'll bring up a list of columns and or tables that share that name. And then I've used that to sort of narrow down where to find data on the SQL Server that they're seeing in the application.
Gotcha. Okay.
Kind of a data dictionary, if you will. And it's probably better with visuals, but
sure.
All right. Any last thoughts as we wrap it up?
No, I've SQL Server DBA and Sybase DBA for many years and sort of stumbled across this and saw the power and once you get past a couple months of the learning curve, just being able to leverage the Qlik, either view or sense solutions to, data, even just one person, let alone an entire organization that is all ordering off the same menu, if you will, and can see the data the same way, and then gives them the ability to ask their own questions in QlikSense.
Awesome. Well, should we do SQL Family?
Absolutely.
So, Michael, how did you first get started using SQL Server?
I was the typical accidental DBA, but I started in the Sybase world and did that for a couple of years and noticed my counterparts all had many more years experience than me. So found an opportunity at a company that was on Microsoft SQL Server 7.0 before it went public. So we were sort of a beta site and thought, all right, that's it.
Very cool. Now, if you could change one thing about SQL Server, what would it be?
This was the toughest one. Nothing really major. I guess like some minor things that I would probably change. Sometimes it irritates me when the different either size or time increments are in different values, milliseconds, seconds, gigabytes, megabytes, kilobytes, and just having to do all the conversions gets to be annoying at times.
Oh, gotcha. So you're being a little bit standardizing the some of the reporting data. Correct.
Or, okay, here's the formula I have to use on every size field because they're all in kilobytes or whatever it might be. And then the one today, we had an issue at work with some deadlocks and kept going into the SQL Server, through the GUI, went into the log, and as soon as you expand the error log, it pops up and defaults to the SQL with some deadlocks and kept going into the SQL Server, through the GUI, went into the log, and as soon as you expand the error log, it pops up and defaults to the SQL Server agent log. So you have to uncheck that and check the current SQL Server log. So just little, no showstoppers, but
Sure.
just kind of annoying little things.
Right.
What is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
Ooh. Had a CIO at a company years ago. He was a Marine Corps reservist who has since gone on to retire as a general. But point being is that he said that no one will care about your career more than you. So it's up to you to advance your career to whatever level you want to be.
I like that. So true.
Michael, our last question for you today. If you could have one superhero power, what would it be?
Oh. I'll probably go vanilla here and say to fly.
Woohoo! Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed.
No.
Flying is a great superpower.
Predicting the future and all that stuff, that would be cool, like episode 89. But I would say the flying. I do a fair amount of driving, and so it would be nice to get to places a heck of a lot quicker.
There you go.
All right. Very good.
Well, awesome. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and hope I provided value to the compañeros out there.
Hey, compañeros. That's right. Well, if you didn't, compañeros, you let us know, right? And we'll let Mike know. No.
Absolutely.
That would be very nice.
I know I learned something along the way. Thanks, Michael.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
So thanks again, Michael, for kind of giving us an overview of Qlik and talking a little bit about some of these features. Again, I think it's helpful from time to time just to kind of...
Although Qlik was not something that I had been very familiar with, I'd heard about it here and there, but I had no idea really what it was and how long it's been around. So
right.
Looks like a pretty cool BI solution, given the right scenario that you'd like to try out one day.
That's right. I also think it's interesting to note that Microsoft does pay attention, right, to its competitors. And I'm remembering a comment that was made at SQL Summit last year, and they had the SQL Server Program Manager there. And somebody asked him about some feature, and he's like, no, we're not going to do that. And then they said, the person asking the question said, well, Oracle just announced that. And he's like, oh, well, that changes things.
Yes.
And so I think, again, if for nothing else, just kind of, again, seeing how the other half lives may give some influence as to the direction that Microsoft takes, or that they decide not to take.
Yeah, it's interesting how often there will be a feature that
takes, or that they decide not to take.
Yeah, it's interesting how often there will be a feature that gets added because it needs to be there to compete with someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than just a feature that gets added because people have been asking for it for years.
Right.
Yeah.
Although in their defense, right, I think Microsoft has been better of late of responding to the community-driven requests.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a whole different world than it was 10 years ago with SQL Server requests.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Our music for SQL Server in the News is by Mansardian, used under Creative Commons. If you have questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter. Let us know what you're thinking. We are quickly approaching episode 100, and so we're looking forward to that episode. You can reach us on Twitter. I am at Carlos L. Chacon.
And I'm on Twitter at SQLEMT. And we'll see you on the SQL at SQLEMT. And we'll see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.